true integrity from the belly of the beast, your host and conservative connection, Dr. Jim Robbins.
You are on the Conservative Connection on All Fired Up Radio. I am the senior editorial writer at the Washington Times, America's conservative newspaper, really the only newspaper you need. And, in these days of newspapers. Joining us as always, the dynamic, the exciting, the beautiful Bea Wilson. How you doing, Bea?
I'm doing okay. It's pretty good. I mean, my guys are getting ready to go to the parade, as your family has done, and here we are getting to be the parade for others who can't get out there. So I think that's pretty cool.
Oh yeah, we're the audio parade.
I love it.
Yeah. Well, and we're gonna talk about later in the show. We're gonna talk about how important parades are, and the beneficial effects that parades have on your children, according to a study from Harvard. Yes, from Harvard.
From Harvard.
A Harvard professor found that parades are better. Well, actually, I don't want to get ahead of the story, but we'll see whether they think that parades are beneficial in inspiring patriotism and what. Maybe some people think that inspiring that kind of feeling is not a benefit.
Well, and we can see what it has been like in America once we took out all the patriotism. And I can tell you that I think it's very inspirational for my kids. My kids look forward to parades. They love parades. Me, I can't stand standing out there in this sweltering heat. But my boys, they love it. I mean, they get on their bicycles with their dad and they go down to the parade and they watch and they scream and they clap and they cheer and it's a fantastic event for them. I mean, it's something for them to look forward to, and afterward they get to mingle with the community. I think it's fantastic. I love parades.
Oh, yeah. Parades are great. We have a lot of them around here, whether it's President's Day or July 4th, Memorial Day. There are all kinds of parades around here. And they're great, just to watch or to be in. Sometimes, if you get a chance to be in a parade, that's a lot of fun. Seems like a lot of walking, but people are glad to see you. So why not?
Yeah, the kids love it. They love it. And I think I was in a 9/12 parade once, and it it shows off your red, white, and blue. There's nothing better than having the opportunity to get out there and boast, we are American.
That's right. If you take out the patriotism, then it's just a bunch of people living in a place.
Exactly. Right.
It could be anywhere. So, without that added pride, without that added meaning, what do you got? You just are folks who happen to be somewhere. So,
right. All in the street.
I mean, if that's good enough for you, then fine. But it's not good enough for me. Yeah, This is really a great holiday. I love July 4th. It's fantastic. That Thanksgiving is another really good, nice American holiday. But July 4th, I mean, celebrating freedom and independence and the revolution, all those good things, and everything that came of it. It's just a great day. And I always think of the musical 1776. The play or the movie version, folks should see that. That'll get you going. There's good music and the founding fathers jumping around, dancing, singing, having a good time, cracking jokes, needling each other. The whole Adams Jefferson thing, Ben Franklin with his witty sayings and his avuncular nature, all that stuff. It's just such a great play, great musical. If you can rent it or, stream it or what have you, it's definitely worth seeing. I think a lot of folks these days haven't seen it because the play was in the movie sort of early 70s product when it was on Broadway back then. And, maybe some folks haven't seen that one, or if your kids haven't seen it. It's really fun.
Yeah, it's definitely something to do today, and while you're winding out the day and you're stuffed, it's very much like Thanksgiving, isn't it? You go out and you barbecue instead of staying in and cooking, but it's very much like Thanksgiving. You stuff yourself until you can't stuff anymore, and then you come in and you watch TV, and so maybe that would be a great way to round off the day.
Oh yeah, and I'm sure it's probably running on TV. Some cable channel somewhere. I mean, there's so many channels these days. Who knows?
This afternoon on TCM, Kevin says 1776 is on this afternoon on TCM.
There you go.
There you go.
Turner Classic Movies. Check it out. It is well worth seeing. I love that thing. It's there are funny parts, there are dramatic parts, serious parts. It's just great. So, in fact, locally it was put on here by one of our a local theater troupe, sort of in a small setting, and they did a great job. They did such a great job.
That's fantastic.
Yeah. So definitely worth seeing, and it'll get your patriotic juices flowing. It's very funny, but also serious. So a good combination of the two, a great mix. And, you watch that thing and see, the ending is dramatic because, of course, the, signing of the Declaration of Independence, which is sort of the end of the movie. I hope I'm not giving anything away. Everybody knows the story of the Declaration of Independence, which it dramatizes. But yeah, when they signed it, pledging their lives in sacred honor, that was the beginning. That wasn't, when we celebrate July 4th, we're not celebrating our victory, like, the end of the war, the victory over the British, the achievement physically of independence, politically, but it's the beginning. So, this was when, we had actually already been at war for over a year, because Lexington and Concord was April of 1775. So, as John Adams points out in the play, by the way, it's like, hey, we're already at war. We might as well declare it, trying to convince people to get on the stick, Hey, we are fighting a war. Let's say something about it. But in any case, so it's a celebration of optimism and looking forward and of a struggle. Because just because a bunch of guys in Philadelphia sign a piece of paper, that's all well and good, but they had to fight to get the freedom that God and nature had intended them to have. So I was looking back through some things I had written. I wrote an essay a while ago for National Review, actually it was 10 years ago, on 1777, like the first anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. What was going on then? Because things weren't great.
Right, right.
The Revolution was a hard-fought war. It wasn't just, George Washington stood up and said, let us be free, and that was it. There were, in fact, in that year, you can think about, Trenton and Princeton and some other good battles that we won. But we lost most of them in that first year. Particularly in New York, where the British just swept Washington's army right out of New York City, and there were some other problems that we faced. But I was looking at what was going on July 4th, 1777. And it was kind of a mix. Things were definitely not going our way overall. We had John Paul Jones was in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. He was outfitting a ship, one of our first warships, the 18-gun warship, the Ranger, which had been he had been granted command by Congress a few weeks earlier. On the same day that Congress passed a resolution determining that the flag of the 13 United States be 13 stripes, alternate red and white, the Union be 13 stars, white in a blue field, representing a new constellation. So John Paul Jones was commissioned on what would later become Flag Day, the day that the flag was commissioned by Congress as well. And the young women of Portsmouth, New Hampshire, cut up a silk wedding dress of a young lady who had donated it, who had been married to an officer of the New Hampshire militia, to make a flag for this ship. And he raised it on July 4th, 1777, over the warship Ranger. And it became the first United States flag to fly over a U.S. Navy vessel. It was the first U.S. flag to be seen abroad in Europe when he sailed across the ocean to engage the enemy. And it was the first U.S. flag to be saluted by the guns of a foreign fleet, by the French. So that's pretty good. That's a good day. Meanwhile, another Navy officer, Dr. Jonathan Haskins, who was a junior surgeon, who served on the privateer Charming Sally. We need more ship names like that. But had been captured by the British and shipped to England as one of our first POWs. And he, on July 4th, 1777, was sitting in Mill Prison in Plymouth, England. And he was just sort of, on that day, watching the ships come in and out of the harbor. But he noted in his journal, this day, 12 months, the United States of America declared independent, which they've supported 1 year. God send they ever may. In New York, British troops under the command of General John Burgoyne shocked the American defenders of Fort Ticonderoga, which is in eastern New York. So a strategic fort because it commanded both north-south movement and east-west movement, from New England to the other colonies, and then from New York up the Hudson and, towards Lake Champlain and into Canada. So a very strategic position back in that war. But on July 4th, the American defenders saw that the British had placed cannon on Mount Defiance, which is right next to the fort, a feat thought impossible. So it wasn't defended well enough. I thought, well, they can't get cannon up there, so let's not worry about it. Well, guess again. So the British had cannon up there, which basically made the defense of the fort untenable. And in siege warfare, things like that are really critical. That's how we ran the British out of Boston Harbor the previous year, by getting the jump on them and having cannon emplaced above them, above targeting their warships. So the American commander, General Arthur St. Clair, held a council of war, and they concluded that the fort had to be abandoned. So under cover of darkness, they did, so that they wouldn't be made prisoner. And it was a huge victory. Burgoyne was promoted. I mean, just for, there wasn't even fought. The battle wasn't even fought. That's, Sun Tzu says, that's the best battle, the one you win without fighting, just by the strategic move. And when the fall of Fort Ticonderoga reached King George III, he dashed into his queen's bedchambers exclaiming, "I have beat them. I have beat all the Americans." That's how important that victory was. King George thought it was it. That was it. The war's over. Ethan Allen, who had led the attack that had taken the fort, Ticonderoga, from the British 2 years earlier, July 4th, 1777, he was a POW in British-occupied New York. And he reported that Burgoyne had written a very ostentatious proclamation condemning the Declaration of Independence. This is how the British celebrated our first year of independence, of declared independence. Ethan Allen wrote, "I wish my countrymen in general could but have an idea of the assuming tyranny and haughty, malevolent, and insolent behavior of the enemy at that time, and from thence discern the intolerable calamities which this country have extricated themselves from by their public spiritedness and bravery." Yes, the haughty Burgoyne, so confident, so sure of himself. Congressman Sam Adams I know what you're thinking, brewer and patriot. He was unimpressed by Burgoyne's proclamation, and he wrote to his friend Arthur Lee, of the Lee family of Virginia, who at the time was our ambassador to Spain, trying to forge an alliance with the Spanish crown. He predicted the British would fare poorly, attempting to conquer, as he said, the whole army of the United States, together with the numerous, hardy, and stubborn militia of New England. Great Britain will ever show herself feeble in her efforts to conquer America. So, Sam Adams, don't mess with him. Meanwhile, Washington, who was at his headquarters in Morristown, New Jersey, he was busy actually fighting the war. He wasn't bragging about it. You know, Washington was a taciturn guy. He didn't say much. He was just busy trying to win. And, you know, back in those days, I guess these days too, but particularly then, warfare was a lot about maneuver, because you had these big armies and tenuous supply lines, and you know, you had to figure out what the enemy was doing before they did it, so that you knew how to move when they moved, so you could not get boxed in, particularly Washington, who was fighting a defensive war. And he didn't know if the British were going to attack Philadelphia, you know, move south from New York and go for where the Congress was, or head north up the Hudson and try to break the country in two. And he wrote to Major General John Armstrong, who commanded the Pennsylvania militia, "I am yet perplexed to find out the real intentions of the enemy." But he knew that whatever General Howe, commanding the British forces, was going to do, he was certain that Ticonderoga would hold out and that his northern flank would remain secure. Because he didn't know yet. Ticonderoga was not holding out. And, you know, it just goes to show. It would be days, in fact. I mean, given communications of the time, I mean, today we know everything instantly, but Washington wouldn't even know that his northern front was collapsing for several days, and a disaster was developing. Meanwhile, on our frontier, Burgoyne had raised the Iroquois against the Americans, against the frontiersmen, and isolated settlements out there had to fend for themselves. There was no army coming out to save them. There were no, you know, you can't call the sheriff if you were out settling on the frontier. And suddenly the British had raised some of the tribes, not all of them, but the tribes that allied with the British against you, then you better defend yourself. And on July 4th in Boonesboro, Kentucky, which at the time was, you know, way out in the frontier, Daniel Boone and his settlers faced an attack by 200 Shawnee Indians, the beginning of a siege that would last for 2 days. After 2 days, one townsman was dead, 2 wounded, and 7 Indians were killed. So luckily, not a lot of people died in that particular attack. And Boone noted in his journal, laconically, finding themselves not likely to prevail, the Shawnee raised the siege and departed. Again, a man of few words, Daniel Boone. No drama, just we beat them and they left. Meanwhile, down in Tennessee, there was a peace conference going on between the American settlers and the Cherokee. They had been in confederation with the Shawnee, the Delaware, and the Mohawk, at war with the Americans since May of 1776. Again, and with British help, who were giving them guns and things. But they decided to have a peace conference. And so the American soldiers paraded around, formed in platoons, firing 2 volleys per platoon, 6 platoons, with the 13th volley fired by all in honor of the 13 states. And then they read aloud the Declaration of Independence and explained it to the Cherokee, according to one participant, who were invited to imbibe and join in the celebration. The day's festivities ended with a great dance in which both the Indians and the whites participated. So, suspending hostilities, just have a little party. More civilized time in a way. Meanwhile, in Philadelphia, the Congress was still meeting. They were doing business as usual. There was really no mention of the coming anniversary, except on the day of, when Thomas Wharton of the Philadelphia Committee of Safety petitioned the city on behalf of the True Friends of Liberty, who had expressed a desire to hold public rejoicings and illuminations in honor of the Declaration. And so the celebration began at 1 p.m. with cannonades of 13 shots fired from ships drawn up in the Delaware River. And a feast was prepared. The wait staff for the feast were British deserters from Georgia. And the music for the feast was supplied by the Hessian band that had been captured at Trenton on December 26th. I'm sure the Hessians were more than happy to be hanging out in Philadelphia. And the meal was followed by toasts and speeches commemorating great deeds of American patriots, cannon and musket fire, boisterous cheers that echoed down the streets. And a local newspaper reported, the evening was closed with the ringing of bells, and at night there was a grand exhibition of fireworks, which began and concluded with 13 rockets on the Commons, and the city was beautifully illuminated. Everything was conducted with the greatest order and decorum, and the face of joy and gladness was universal. Thus may the 4th of July, that glorious and ever memorable day, be celebrated through America by the sons of freedom from age to age, till time shall be no more. Amen and amen. So the first birthday celebration of the United States was what John Adams had invoked a year earlier, when he then wrote, in 1776, he wrote to his wife Abigail that the anniversary of the Declaration should be solemnized with pomp and parade, with shows, games, sports, guns, bells, bonfires, and illuminations from one end of this continent to the other, from this time forward, forevermore. That's what Adams said, hey, we have to party. Founding father, right? It's like a duty. But in 1777, a few days after the celebration, he wrote to his wife that he was wasted and exhausted in mind and body, and that his third year in service to the cause of liberty, he was 6 months at that time separated from his family. What sacrifice haven't I made, he asked. Of course, to his partner in life, who was making sacrifices of her own. But peace was years in the future, and there were many more sacrifices to be made. Adams had written, America would suffer calamities and distresses yet more dreadful in the years to come. But he believed the experience would better his countrymen. The times of hardship would inspire us with many virtues which we have not, he said, and correct many vices which threaten to disturb, dishonor, and destroy us. So by carrying that burden, simply by going through it, it would build and refine the American character. A wise man. So that was 1777, the first year. Things weren't so great. But the fight itself was what was improving them. And of course, things would get better. The revolution was long and hard fought, but ultimately victorious. It's also a good day to think of our warriors, and people who are now fighting for us overseas, and people serving at home, particularly people in the war zone. It's a holiday for many of us, but there are no days off in war, particularly when you're not fighting an enemy, like Cherokees who want to have a day of peace with you and imbibe, That's not the enemy that we're facing these days. No days off. July 4th, 1944, Navy and Air and Sea Forces attacked Iwo Jima and Chichijima in preparation for the invasion that was about to come of those islands. And this attack saw the first use of kamikaze suicide tactics. This has been the most fireworks I have seen on the 4th in my life, said Seaman Dennis Latham on the destroyer USS Brown. He said of the islands that they were bombing that they're very beautiful. At the ends of each big island, there are huge volcanic mountains towering into the sky. It's a shame they are to be destroyed. Of course, one of those is Mount Suribachi, on which the Marines raised the flag in the famous photo. Meanwhile, in Europe, where our forces, British, Canadians, and others, had established lodgements on Normandy a month earlier to celebrate independence. This is a private John Ausland wrote to his parents outside of St. Lo in France. Dear folks, today, just to celebrate Independence Day, we loaded every gun, as did all battalions in the Army, and fired them simultaneously at 1200. Happy July 4th, enemy. Here you go. (1951), Private Glenn Robinson manning a defensive position in Korea. I didn't even realize it was the 4th of July, he wrote to his parents. I was too busy ducking. Sergeant Leroy A. Mendonça, Company B, 7th Infantry Regiment, 3rd Infantry Division, had been helping consolidate his platoon's position on a hill, Hill 586, one of those nondescript hills in the Korean War. So the enemy made a strong night counterattack. His platoon was ordered to pull back, but he volunteered to stay behind to cover the withdrawal. He held off the enemy as best he could, with rifle and hand grenades, until his ammunition was exhausted. Then he continued to fight with bayonet and rifle butt, taking out 37 enemy troops before falling mortally wounded. But his unit was able to regroup, and they held the hill. 16 years later, July 4th, 1967, Private First Class Melvin E. Newland, 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines, manning a perimeter machine gun position at Nong Son in Vietnam, when Viet Cong guerrillas mounted a sudden mortar and infantry attack. 4 Marines with him in that position were killed outright, and he was seriously wounded. Nevertheless, Melvin manned his weapon and beat back 2 assaults before being rendered unconscious from a grenade explosion and overrun. The enemy took him for dead and moved on to assault the main objectives in the Marine position. But Melvin regained consciousness and poured fire into the enemy rear, disrupting their attack and giving his fellow Marines more time to organize a coordinated defense. The enemy rushed him 2 more times before he finally succumbed, but by then the Marines were able to stave off the enemy main force. Both Melvin Newland and Leroy Mendonça were awarded posthumous medals of honor for their heroic actions on Independence Day. See, that's how some people spend the 4th. So all across the world, we have people at posts on ships, air bases, wherever they happen to be, FOBs, wherever they might be, in Afghanistan, elsewhere in the Middle East, or if they're in Okinawa, if they're in Europe, wherever they are. Hopefully they are taking time or finding ways to celebrate Independence Day in ways great or small. And maybe for those most fortunate, it could be something like what they would enjoy at home, with hot dogs on the grill, or playing some softball or baseball, or maybe with a fireworks display. But for others, it's a patrol in a hot Humvee or on foot. It's MREs when they get around to it. And hopefully, no fireworks. So God bless our troops who are out there guaranteeing our independence. what about at home? I mean, what does it all mean? I read something a couple years ago. I was looking for an update to this, but I haven't found it, which is a study from Gallup, USA Today Gallup poll conducted. This was in 2010. They do it periodically. 32% of Americans describe themselves as extremely patriotic, which was the highest number of any study that they had done. And since 1999, up 19%. Since 2002, it was up 8%. And, January 2002, that's a lot of patriotism going on, given the fact that the 9/11 attacks had occurred shortly before. The most patriotic groups, according to the self-described extremely patriotic, Republicans, 52%, conservatives, 48%, and those over age 65, 40%. The least patriotic, Democrats, 20%, meaning only 20% would describe themselves as extremely patriotic. Liberals, 19%, and those aged 18 to 29, 22%. Interestingly, the most patriotic groups had seen double-digit increases in their extremely patriotic sentiment, while the least patriotic groups had either flatlined or declined. So it's more evidence of that problem that we have been discussing since the show's inception, of the fact that it seems like there are just two groups in this country heading in separate directions. That it's not a partisan divide. It's deeper than that. It's something much deeper. It's something in the American character. Just two different visions. I'm sure we'll talk more about that in the future, but this was just more evidence of that. So you have this patriotism gap. And it reflects the battle lines of the culture war. Because if you're brought up in an educational system in which the United States is portrayed negatively, the country of slavery and segregation, of unjust wars, of environmental pollution, of evil capitalism, multinational corporate, etc. If that's the view of America that you have, then why be patriotic? Why would you be proud of that? If that's your view, if that's the view that you were educated to believe, whether it was in grade school or college or whatever, then yeah, why would you be patriotic? I'm trying to look at it from their point of view. Hey, if that's what I felt about this country, then yeah. What a rotten country. Why be proud of anything in the past if everything in the past is made to look so negative? So when Michelle Obama says in February of 2008 that for the first time in her adult lifetime she was really proud of her country, well, I understand that. You're looking at it from their point of view. Why should you be? If you really think that this country is so terrible, then yeah, granted. When candidate Barack Obama promised to fundamentally transform the United States, that's an exciting message. If you view America as morally bankrupt, internationally despised country with a despicable history, yeah, that's a place that needs fundamental transformation, right? I get it. If that's your perspective, I get it. It's not mine. If you see the United States as a shining city on a hill, as the font of freedom, as a country of faith, hope, and charity, as the product of a divine plan, as a defender of democracy, as the last best hope of mankind, then that vision does not need fundamental transformation. It might need implementation, but it doesn't need to be changed. So when we have this rising tide of patriotism and sort of this division growing, it's a response, in my opinion, a response to the assault on those ideals. You have more patriots because you need them. Kind of like back in 1775 when the Minutemen were grabbing their muskets. Like, why then? Well, because the British are coming. People respond to these things. And in fact, just to digress a minute, in this book I have coming out in August called Native Americans, not referring to the American Indians, but referring to those who self-identify in this country as being ethnically American, which is a growing characteristic of people according to the census. The more and more Americans are willing to say that they're not of any particular ancestry or ethnicity, but American. 20 million Americans said that on census or American community survey forms. The people who are basically staking a claim to being not part of anything else, but just being American, which I think is a fantastic development because it's about time. I mean, there have been colonists here for over 400 years, and we've had our country, the United States, for over 200 years, and a lot of people can trace their ancestry back a long way. But the great thing about it is you don't have to be somebody, descended from someone who is at Jamestown or from the Mayflower or something like that to make the claim to be an American per se. You can be someone who just arrived, or you can be someone who's been here for a little while or whose family has. It doesn't matter, so long as you subscribe to the ideals, because that's how Americans are defined. Anyway, if you want to read all about it, it'll be in the book that's coming out. But that's what I see, though, this rising tide. It's a defense. It's not people suddenly deciding to come up with this new idea. It's a defense of the ideals, a defense of the dream of the first new nation founded in liberty. And it's people who are not willing to give up the fight. Be sending me a message. What book, Jim? It's called Native Americans. Coming out in August. Yeah, don't worry. I'll be promoting my book a lot. I mean, yeah, I'll tell you all about it. I think it's great. It's full of stuff like this. In fact, some of it I took some old essays and things that I wrote and just adapted them to the book because they're not doing anybody any good sitting in the National Review archive or Washington Times archive. So why not? But it goes into all these things. So. B says she's sending me messages on Skype. It is the book for this time. I'm not a guy who likes to brag a lot. I'll leave that up to others. You can decide. I think it's pretty good as books go. But, if you're going to write a book, you might as well like it. Right?
It is excellent.
It's okay.
It is excellent. And
okay.
And it's on Amazon for pre-order, but you have to wait till August until it gets actually out there. But and I don't even know when. But we have the books pre-ordered at allfire.media, so we'll have them here. If you're in a position where you can't purchase them, just keep tuning in. Yeah,
I'm hoping that everyone will hear a lot more about it. Not just from me, but from others. But we haven't even done that. There's this whole thing that goes into getting a book out. You have to have a marketing plan, and there's the way it's distributed. The bookstores have to handle it. Of course, there aren't a lot of those left. Keep getting fewer of those. But then there's online marketing, and there's this whole thing. We haven't even done that process yet, but I suspect it's going to start very soon. We'll have meetings and decide the cover and a bunch of other jazz and talking points and blah, blah. But don't worry. If you tune into this show, you're going to hear about it because I'll talk about it.
I'm very excited about it, and Jim doesn't talk about it nearly enough if you ask me.
I'm not one of those guys. Yeah, that's my problem. Right, because here I spend an hour talking every week. But yeah, I don't talk about myself.
I know you're not a self-promoter. That's what I'm here for.
Yeah, you do it. You're better at it. I'm a shy, retiring type.
I don't think I would go nearly that far. But
yeah, it's true. Hand me a microphone, get me on a stage. Yeah, I'll go all day. You know, I'm a professor. You know, I've always made a living through talking and writing, and I can do it. It's just, you know, say, hey, it's the greatest book. It's the necessary book. It's the one book you need. Okay, I think it's a good book. I'm not gonna say, oh, this book will change your life. Well, it might, or you might just like it a lot. I don't know. What do I know?
I think education always changes your life.
Yeah, for the better.
I think education about America and the pride of Americans is something that will change your life.
Yeah.
And I think it's also, as we're talking about, patriotism is something that we have to have coming into November right now. And so I think it will make a huge impact.
Well, if people read it, it will. We'll see.
If we get it out to enough people, it will make a huge impact. So if you have connections and you're out there, this is the book you want to help us promote.
Yeah, well, particularly in this election year, because, and it's not like Republican versus Democrat. It's more, it's like I say, it's deeper. It's deeper. It's more fundamental, and the problem that we're facing is more fundamental.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So we will see. And incidentally, since Bea brought this to my attention, that one of our listeners, Kevin, was saying to acknowledge Gettysburg, because 149 years ago, and I had a lot of stuff on Facebook yesterday about this because it was day 3, and today was day 4 at Gettysburg. Day 4 there was no fighting, but the armies were in place. They kind of watched each other all day, and it was raining. There was a question, would there be a day 4 fight? But both sides were a little too tired. If there had been a day 5, the Union Army was going to attack. The Union would have been on the offensive, but General Lee withdrew. But yeah, today would have been day 4 at Gettysburg. It's also the 149 years from the fall of Vicksburg. But my first book, Last in Their Class, Custer Pickett and the Goats of West Point, I wrote a lot about Gettysburg because the two most famous last in their class guys, George Pickett and George Custer, both had very important July 3rds at Gettysburg. For Pickett, it was Pickett's charge. And you know that story. For Custer, it was Custer's charges, actually, in the cavalry battle, which was Jeb Stuart's attempt to support Pickett's assault. But he was met by a much smaller and not well-organized force led by George Custer in the cavalry battle near Rummel Farm. And Custer charged in there 3 times, trying to stop and succeeding in causing enough havoc in Confederate ranks to stop that attack. And he took the majority of casualties in that part of the battlefield were his men, but he got the job done. And the boy general, he had been a general for like 2 weeks and had his brigade there, and they were the only guys standing between Jeb Stuart and victory at that part of the battlefield. And come on, you Wolverines, he said to his Michigan cavalry regiment, and in they went. So yeah, Gettysburg. I've been to Gettysburg many times, leading staff rides in my previous career as an instructor or professor at National Defense University and for Marine Corps University. So I know that I've been all over that place. I know Gettysburg inside and out. I'm not saying I'm the world's greatest expert on Gettysburg, but I've been there a lot. And it is just a great place to go. Even if you don't know anything about the battlefield, it is just a fantastic place to walk around. All the monuments and just getting to know the place. All kinds of bookstores, and sometimes there are recreators hanging around. If you're into that, and particularly if you're into the Civil War, but if you're into history generally, I highly recommend a visit to Gettysburg. It's just a fantastic place with obviously a lot of history. And also, since you're there, General Eisenhower, after he was president, he retired from the White House and he went to live up there and had a farm up there, and you can also tour his house and that's an additional little benefit. It's like 5 minutes from the battlefield. Little known fact, during World War I, he was in charge of Camp Colt, which was located at Gettysburg, which was our armor training center. Of course, at the time, tanks were a new invention, but Eisenhower was the guy. And anyway, that's how he and Patton got to be good buddies, because they were both early proponents of armored warfare. Anyway, so yeah, Gettysburg. Definitely a place you have to visit if you ever have a chance. Now let me talk about some aspects of July 4th. And this is in today's editorial in the Times, of the people who don't celebrate Independence Day. Well, there was a survey by Visa released Sunday that showed that 21% of Americans will not celebrate the 4th this year, but because they can't afford to, because of the state of the economy. So 21% of Americans, they can't do anything special because they can't afford it. And if you're unemployed, it's not really a holiday. It's just another day, right? You don't have a day off from anything. So that's a problem. But other people are taking a stand against the holiday on principle, or what they call principle. There was an essay in The Progressive, which is a left-wing magazine. This was actually a 2010 essay that denounced, but just to give you a flavor of what people are thinking, denounced the mindless patriotic bubble bath of the holiday. Bubble bath. It says patriotism is highly toxic and corrodes the rational faculties. It's used to justify conflict. That American patriotism it's getting in the way of solving global warming, if you can believe that, because according to this essayist, Americans believe we have the God-given right to use up all the resources we can. Well, who's stopping us? They're only resources if you can use them, Or you dig it out of the ground or whatever, you make something out of it. Yeah, you do have a right to do that. It's in John Locke, Sure, there's a tradition of that. It's called liberty. Anyway, the magazine suggests Americans need to get over patriotism and cure the American superiority complex. And as I noted in the editorial, it is a ringing call for the pursuit of unhappiness. A survey by the National Retail Federation found that 68% of Americans are going to attend a barbecue, either host or attend a barbecue, which is the highest percentage in the history of the study, so that's good news. But not so fast, because the Washington Post, our crosstown competitor, is here to tell you that your hamburger hates America. According to the Post, I don't know if this was in Sunday's Post, I think. The hamburger is the product of, the very things that make America bad. Big agriculture driving out family farms. Centralization in the meatpacking industry. Like there's a monopoly in the meatpacking industry that also is running down family farms. Unfair treatment of the laborers who are harvesting the tomatoes and onions that you put on your burger. And Walmart's domination of the hamburger bun market. Hey, this was news to me. But whatever. This is all explanation in the article how like 50% of hamburger buns come from Walmart. So where'd they get that number?
Gosh.
I don't know. Beats me. Is it possible? Okay, fine, whatever. I'm not against it. Hey, if you buy your hamburger buns at Walmart, great. Go buy them. Yeah. I don't, but that's just because there's a grocery store around the corner. So whatever. If I need a hamburger bun, I'll walk over there and get it. It also repeated the myth. This is with respect to lettuce. And there's something like quotes from Jefferson or something about lettuce. And that lower-income people don't have access to fresh vegetables. This is another of America's sins, the so-called food deserts. Do you hear this argument? Michelle Obama was making it. And it's not true. It's not true. This has been debunked. The New York Times ran a whole thing about it, these so-called food deserts, that the reason why lower-income people are out of shape and so forth is that it's not that they don't want to have, whole foods, it's that they can't get them. Not true. In fact, the study in the New York Times found that there are, in fact, more supermarkets per person and per square mile in the cities than outside of them. Which, I mean, only makes common sense when you think about it, because in the suburbs, people are all spread out, and, you know, there'll be like one or two central places where you go to a supermarket, whereas in the cities, you got markets all over the place. And they, in fact, New York Times, they use an example of Harlem, where there are markets all over the place. If you've ever been to Harlem, you can see that. And yes, they have fresh food and everything. It's sort of, you know, out on stands right out there for you to see. Suggestive selling, right? If you want it, you can go get it. But no, according to the Washington Post, it's part of America's oppression of the poor that they are denied lettuce. So, you know, feel guilty, America, when you're munching on that lovely, freshly grilled, delicious hamburger.
Nope.
Feel guilty. That's the message we're getting. Are you kidding me? And, you know, it tries to, there are quotes in this article from, you know, some Thomas Jefferson, the Declaration of Independence. They make reference to the 1862 Homestead Act and, you know, Abraham Lincoln. You're not a real patriot unless you support these, you know, left-wing nonsense that the article was peddling. I mean, if you're really enjoying that hamburger, wow, how patriotic can you be? People suffered for that hamburger.
Yeah, you really should be enjoying some cigarettes or beer or something.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, I'm sure the, you know, baseball bats or softball bats, you know, if you're using wooden ones, were probably carved out of some endangered tree or something, or, you know, creating global warming, because you had to cut a tree down to get that baseball bat.
A cricket's home.
How does that make you feel, America? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, okay, so, I mean, these people are saying, hey, you shouldn't. It's not just you're not going to celebrate 4th of July, but you shouldn't. Or if you do, you should do it in a, you know, sustainable, global-friendly way. Bearing in mind, hey, it's our holiday. You know, every country that has an Independence Day can celebrate it their own way. It's like that's their thing, right? We have our thing. Let us have our thing. But, you know, again, it's just like it's the pursuit of unhappiness. It's this pessimism. I think that's really the major distinction between the two sides, optimism versus pessimism. Their side is so unhappy. It's like they're down all the time.
It's your typical good versus bad.
Yeah, I mean, if they have any, like, optimism at all, it's all based on some response to some dire calamity that's coming, you know. Like, oh, the globe is going to, like, warm up and burn to a crisp. But luckily, we have miracle solar panels and batteries that if only we had enough federal money to throw at it, we would have those things. You know, it's always a positive that somehow turns into a negative or turns into a you know, give me something.
Yes.
But, you know, our team we're the optimists and the happy ones. And by the way, polling bears that out, that conservatives are, by and large, happier and more satisfied with their lives than liberals. Studies show.
Well,
I've never seen one of those types of studies that came to a different conclusion by a wide margin.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, July 4th, I mean, if you don't want to celebrate it, or if you want to be down about it, or you want to find a way to indict the hamburger as the symbol of everything that's wrong with this country, well, fine, go do that. I mean, you're free to do that in this country, too. That's another thing. I mean, you're free to be a bummer. But it's not in the nature of July 4th. As we said before, it's optimistic. It came at the beginning of the revolution. It was all about, hey, good things are going to happen because we're standing up for our ideals. And it's an idealistic holiday. So you got to revisit the nation's founding and celebrate the civic myths that unify the republic. You know, it's a time to tell the stories. If you're a cynical old leftist or a cynical young leftist or whatever, yeah, you're not going to get a good 4th of July. You're just going to grump about something. You can say, oh, yeah, the Constitution was stolen from the Native Americans and it was written on hemp paper. Man. You know, it's that kind of like, okay, whatever. Give me a break.
Yeah, that's typical everyday stuff for them. So, what sets us apart from today, they just want to bring you down. So don't listen to them.
Oh, yeah,
today
absolutely
is
not.
our day.
Yeah. So you have a cookout, the ball games, what, John Adams said, the pomp and parade.
Mm.
That's the liberty we claimed in 1776 being manifest. That is the heritage the founders bequeathed. They didn't know it. They say, and 200 years from now, people will have a hamburger. Because they didn't know about hamburgers, but they would be happy that we're doing it.
Celebration.
Jefferson and something about lettuce and the food deserts. Give me a break. Jefferson would be partying. He would be partying. He was the guy who brought wine to America. Don't tell me he wouldn't be having a good time. Right?
In his vineyard, yeah.
Yeah. Heck yeah. Who knows what went on there? But, hey, okay. But this is what the 4th is supposed to mean. So as I said in the editorial, let the flame of freedom burn in every heart and every grill.
Mm-hmm.
When you're lighting up that grill, that's the flame of freedom, my friends.
Absolutely. I'm going to remember that.
Hey. Oh, good. Well, I'm glad that something I said is memorable.
Yes, it's the one thing that you've said, and thank goodness you got it in there.
Oh, yeah, because time is short. Well, let me just say, getting back to parades, since our time is winding down, I want to tell you about the study, which came out last year, called Shaping the Nation, Estimating the Impact of 4th of July Using a Natural Experiment. Nice academic title, by Jan Erik Andreas Maidstone of Bocconi University in Italy and David Yanagasawa Drott of Harvard's Kennedy School.
Wow,
and they were looking at if you go to a parade, what does it do? According to the study, 4th of July celebrations have a significant impact on people's political preferences. A rain-free 4th of July, take note, a rain-free 4th of July makes it 1.3% more likely that an individual contemporaneously identify as a Republican. Check it out. The likelihood that an adult at age 40 identifies as a Republican increases by 0.76 percentage points, 0.75%, for each rain-free 4th of July during childhood, where childhood is defined as ages 3 to 18. The effects are strongest at ages 7 through 10. And the impact on political preferences is permanent, with no evidence of the effects depreciating as individuals grow older. Check it out. Take your kids to parades.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That is the message. It's scientific study. That every parade you go to, you take your kids to, is more likely that they will grow up to be a Republican in this case, or to be a conservative.
Yeah, and if you can get them into that parade, just don't let your kid ride in the parade just on his bicycle.
Yeah.
Put some little streamers on his bicycle or her bicycle and let her ride. That is what gives them the memories, just participation in that sort of thing.
So, they say that, and there are no effects on the other side. It's not like it just has good effects, and it's just on our side. So, they're saying that, of course, they conclude, the right appropriated the symbols of patriotism. But no way, we did not appropriate the symbols of patriotism. The other side left them. They rejected them, starting sometime in the 60s. With multiculturalism, moral relativism, victimization ideology that teaches the United States is no better than any other country in the world, that, celebrating American exceptionalism is a form of discrimination or something. No way. This is the best country in the world.
Amen.
So we didn't appropriate it. We just acknowledge it. So go out there and celebrate it. You're part of the experiment in human liberty and human history. Be part of it. All right. I'm going to go have a hamburger. See you next week, everybody. Have a good one.
Thanks, Jim.
Conservative Connection with Dr. Jim Robbins is an All Fired Up Radio original broadcast. To find more Conservative Connection podcasts, go to www.allfiredupmedia.com. Our next live broadcast is Military Monday with Betty Kilbride at 6 p.m. Central Time on Monday evening. Thanks for listening to All Fired Up Radio.